All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Got a few folks. Thank you for taking some time out of your evening tonight to join this webinar. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about our Family Forest Carbon Program and what that means for landowners exploring enrollment in the program. So we'll talk a little bit through benefits, requirements, what it is overall, what next steps you could follow if you're interested in learning more, and there will be a Q&A at the end. So before we move on into introductions and into the content here, I just want to direct your attention down to, if you're on a computer, the bottom of your screen. If you're on a phone, I'm not sure exactly where it is, but there's a feature called Q&A in this Zoom webinar. So you can utilize that to drop in questions as we go. And we will circle back around near the end to answer whatever questions come up. So feel free to utilize that throughout the presentation, and we'll come back to it. So before we dive in, who are we? So you're going to hear from myself and a couple of my colleagues today. My name's Scott Martin. I'm the Senior Manager of Account Management at FFCP. So myself and my team, we're responsible for basically being a point of contact for landowners who are exploring enrollment. So before they enroll, we go through a process of project planning, understanding our terms, our contract, our offers, everything like that. And my account management team is responsible for making sure you get all your questions answered, you have all the information you need to make a good decision for yourself. So that's what I'm responsible for. You'll also be hearing from Sierra, who is our Senior Forestry Manager in the Northeast. And she'll be talking through some eligibility practice requirements around specifically the forestry part of our program. And then you'll also hear from Kyle Brown, who's our community manager in our community and sustained engagement team. He'll talk a little bit about what enrollment looks like, the community around our enrolled landowners, and what benefits you could get from that. And he'll also guide our Q&A. So with all that said, we can dive in. So who is the American Forest Foundation? AFF is a national conservation nonprofit organization that empowers family forest landowners to make a meaningful conservation impact on their land. That's a mouthful. It's very wordy. Basically, we date all the way back into the first half of the 1900s, and we've been under a few different names, but always been in the business of supporting landowners who are interested in sustainably stewarding their land, making a conservation impact, getting the most value out of it they can, making sure it stays within their family and gets passed down through generations. So we're in the business to help landowners like yourselves. So why do we offer the Family Forest Carbon Program? Traditionally, carbon markets have been very inaccessible to smaller landowners. And when I say smaller, I mean anywhere between 5 to 10,000 acres, which was traditionally the amount of acreage you would need to make your own carbon project financially worth all the upfront costs and basically the headache of starting a program. So when I say smaller landowners, that's most of us, right? That's most of the family forest land in the country. 39% of forests in the United States are owned by families and individuals like yourselves who care a lot about their woods, but really often don't have the opportunity to access some of the potential of their property like carbon markets. So AFF, in conjunction with the Nature Conservancy, offers the Family Forest Carbon Program to landowners basically to open that door, right? So we're taking many, many hundreds of family forest landowners, and we're basically accumulating all of that carbon impact so that we can operate a carbon project using that entire impact while passing the benefits back to our landowners, right? As a nonprofit, we're really just interested in supporting landowners, supporting our mission, and passing those benefits on to you. So that's what we're here to do. And it's important to know how AFF and the FFCP are funded. So first and foremost, we're funded by the carbon market, right? So we enter into carbon credit purchase agreements with companies like, say, Netflix or REI. And in exchange for that, they provide funding to us, right? They're purchasing the credits that we create, and that allows us to fund the landowner side of the operation. Financial resources, FMPs, we'll get into some of the benefits in a few slides here. In addition to that, we are funded by a variety of different grants and private donations. Our end goal with the FFCP is to get to a point where it is fully funded by the carbon market, right? So it's kind of its own entity that operates solely based on the business that it's doing. But it's new, and until we get it fully operational, we are operational, but until we get it scaled to the degree that we're looking to, we will continue to rely on some alternate funding sources as we go. So I mentioned why we offer FFCP, but what is the Family Forest Carbon Program? So FFCP helps landowners with at least 30 eligible forested acres reach their forest management goals by providing income, guidance from a forester, and forest management plans, as well as some other benefits we'll get into. The program improves forest health, but improves the health of really the whole ecosystem: forest, soil, water, air, wildlife, and your timber value. In addition to the carbon, of course, stored on the land, which makes this all possible for us. So what do we offer, right? And what do we take on, and what do we pass on to? So guaranteed annual payments. We want to be a bridge to these forest markets by providing guaranteed annual payments. You'll know what those payments look like up front. So if you decide to move forward and you get an offer for enrollment, we lay out the next 20 years of payments, and those are guaranteed. It's not going to change based on the market. You're going to know what to expect every year throughout the program. We do already bake in anticipated future market valuation changes. Basically, the market is expected to continue to grow over the 20 years, next 2025 into the future. So we've already factored in a certain amount of anticipated growth. But if the market doesn't perform as expected, because those payments are guaranteed, FFCP is taking on that risk. So if the market goes down, you're still going to get paid what we guarantee, and you don't assume that risk. So your payments aren't impacted by market behavior. So let's talk, I touched on benefits a little bit, but let's dive in a little bit deeper into the benefits. And we like to kind of group this, the three main benefits, as I already mentioned, are financial payments, support for a forest management plan, whether it's us providing one or providing funding to create one, and access to our foresters. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. So financial benefits, I mentioned guaranteed annual payments. Those are to use for anything. It can go towards your taxes. It is taxable income. I always like to mention that. But it can go towards anything, right? So if you want to use it towards removing invasive species or other things that may benefit the ecosystem, of course, we'd love for it to go to that. But also, if you just want to take your kids out to a nice dinner, or if you want to go on a vacation, or if you want to pay off your car, that money's yours, however you decide to spend it. Beyond just the check you receive each year, some other financial benefits, the timber value of your forest. So our practices are intended to grow your trees further into maturity. So both the size, the quantity of timber, as well as the quality of timber in your forest will improve over the course of the 20-year contract term, which means, of course, you have more options and more kind of financial opportunity at the end of the contract than you otherwise would if you harvested earlier. And importantly, landowners retain full ownership, privacy, and control over their land. So we're not purchasing land. We're not restricting how you can use your land other than how you use your trees. So if you're a hunter, if you're a recreator, if it's open to hiking, whatever the case might be, however you like to enjoy your property, you can keep doing that as long as it doesn't involve removing carbon or timber from the property, or at least keeping that within the contractual bounds, which we'll get into in a few minutes here. So forest management resources, I mentioned access to our foresters. So if you do not have a forester, we're going to put you in touch with one. We have on Sierra's team, we have a team of staff foresters who are directly on our payroll and work directly with our interested landowners. And we also have a very wide network of consulting foresters that are familiar with our program. They understand how it works, but they're also in your communities. So you may already know a consulting forester who is approved to work with us. But if you know a consulting forester who's not familiar with us, we can also reach out to them, train them up, make sure they understand it, and you can keep working with that forester if you prefer. So beyond that, we provide or update forest management plans. So if you don't know what a forest management plan is, it's an extremely valuable document. A lot of our landowners basically enroll just for that. Basically, we talk to you about your goals for your property, right? So you might want to improve wildlife for a certain hunting goal, or you may want to improve biodiversity or a certain species that you want to help facilitate, or removing another species like an invasive. So we sit down, we talk to you, we really get to know what are your intentions and goals for this property long term. And we provide a very thorough document that shares different activities and interventions that you can do on the property to help facilitate the achievement of those goals long term. Basically a roadmap towards your forest management goals. And this can be super helpful for folks who maybe want to pass down the land and maybe their kids don't know where to start, or you're just personally looking for a little bit more guidance on where to start. I know personally my family owns a property in northern Michigan, and when we purchased it, we had no clue where to start. We had this vision of what it could be in the future, but we didn't know the first thing about getting there. And forestry support and a forest management plan has done wonders just for us to know what steps to take to get started. So if you have a forest management plan, we will review that, see if the prescriptions in there are compatible with our practice, and Sierra can talk a little bit more about that. And we also pay for updates. So if that's going to expire and need an update in 5 years, we'll write a check in 5 years based on your acreage for a certain amount to support updating that. And we'll do that up to twice during the contract period. If you don't have a forest management plan at all, we'll either write one for you free of charge and hand it to you, or we will provide a stipend for you to, again, work with a forester if you have specific needs with a specific forester that needs to write it, or if you just would prefer your existing consulting forester write it, we'll provide payment for that. Beyond that, just help with stewardship, your family, future generations. This is a 20-year partnership, right? You're not going to sign this contract and never hear from us again. You're gaining these resources for the next 20 years. So it's super valuable. And beyond that, we have a very wide network of relationships with other organizations. So that might be NRCS and the USDA, the American Tree Farm System, which is a legacy program of the American Forest Foundation, Audubon Society. There's a lot of local and regional partnerships that we have, and we're always trying to connect the dots for our landowners to find the best resources for their goals and in their communities. Finally, community benefits. Kyle's going to be great at explaining this a little bit more, but specifically membership in a community of like-minded landowners. So our enrolled landowners all gain access to the family forest, which is basically a social network for landowners interested in sharing different ideas, questions, projects they're working on, and basically supporting each other and giving each other ideas on how to approach various different land stewardship areas. Financial benefits, right? So we all love to get a check, but also maybe not thinking about how that impacts our communities. So money in your pocket is money in your community's pocket, right? So it really could help to, in a sense, facilitate your local economy, right? You're spending that with your local businesses. It's coming from some large corporations right into your pocket, which is not always the way money flows, and it can be definitely a benefit to you. And healthier forests, as I mentioned, mean community benefits for more than just our human community, right? So if you're thinking about the wildlife or the flora on your property, or even beyond that, atmosphere and water, you're, by enrolling in this program, benefiting that broader landscape and community of everything and everyone that relies on the property. All right, that's the end of my part. Again, feel free to utilize the Q&A if you have any questions for me, but otherwise I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Sierra, who's going to take you through our eligibility.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so like Scott mentioned, I'm Sierra Giroux. I'm the Senior Forestry Manager for the Northeast. So I work with landowners and foresters and our staff foresters as well, with enrollment with landowners for the Family Forest Carbon Program. So first off, I'll just talk a little bit about where we currently are in FFCP. So nationally, our Family Forest Carbon Program has been around since 2020. And since the start, we have enrolled over 80,000 acres, and that's roughly about 650 landowners. Specifically for the Northeast, we started as a pilot program in the state of Vermont in 2022. And currently we have about 14,000 acres enrolled, and just shy of 100 landowners enrolled in the Northeast. We service the states of Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, and Vermont. And then nationally, we also have states serviced in the Midwest, the Appalachians, and also the Southeast region. As of today, roughly about 60% of our enrolled landowners have prescribed or planned harvests in their forest management plan. I think that's a really key component of our program, is that we do allow prescribed harvests, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. And as one of our landowners, Susan here states, the payments from FFCP can help alleviate that tax burden and allow families to keep their property in the family. So getting into the eligibility a little bit. So our program is really catered toward the private landowner, and we enroll lands with at least 30 contiguous forested acres in an eligible geography. So like I mentioned, all of the states in New York are in the Northeast: New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. The forests need to originate from natural regeneration in that forested setting. So plantations at this time in the Northeast are ineligible. There needs to be no restrictions on the land that exclude timber harvest activity, such as local ordinances, conservation easements that don't allow harvesting, or designated no harvest areas. So most working forest easements are allowed, and I'll get into that in detail in a little bit. The land can also not have been enrolled in another forest carbon program, with the exception for former NCX participants. So I'm going to get into the two practices. Right now we have two practices in the Northeast. The first one here is enhance your woodlands. One key component is that the basic eligibility is the same for both of these practices. The only difference is enhance your woodland allows sustainable harvesting, and the next practice that I'll get into, grow older forest, does not allow harvesting for the contract period. So on your forest, it needs to have a composition of mostly maple beech birch forest type, which is very prevalent in the Northeast. We do allow some exceptions and can enroll relatively small areas of softwood forest or a different forest type, such as oaks or pines, as long as your property has at least 30 acres of that maple beech birch forest. And a forester, one of our staff foresters or consulting forester, can get into detail about that and talk about your forest. In terms of stocking, we need at least 60 square feet of basal area of mostly pole or saw timber sized forest. So basically that measurement means it needs to be at the stage where it could otherwise be commercially harvested. And to get into the practice a little bit more, enhance your woodland. This practice is for family forest owners who want the option to actively manage their woodland within the next 20 years. Under this practice, a thinning or a gap harvest can be applied. Some of the examples of removals can be up to 25% removal, but total canopy gaps or patches need to be less than 20% of the area of your forest. And a forester could explain that into detail when thinking about harvesting in your land. So essentially, this practice is designed to retain a higher forest carbon stocking than traditional thinning harvests or business as usual harvesting. And depending on your forest condition, if you are able to create gaps, this promotes forest regeneration and also a young forest habitat for wildlife that like that type of habitat. The next practice, as I mentioned, is grow older forest. So this practice, as I said before, the eligibility is the same. So we're looking at predominantly hardwood forest with that same stocking level. But this practice includes a commitment to not harvest over the 20-year period. And the intent of this practice is to allow forest stands and trees to grow for longer, which then can be managed sustainably for timber over the long term. So it's retaining higher carbon stocks on site than before this practice was implemented. This practice can cover the entire ownership, or you can plan on having a combination of both of these practices on your ownership. So you can have a little bit, some areas of enhance your woodland and some areas of grow older forest, depending on the stage of your forest and what you would prefer. We do have some allowances, some exceptions, especially if there's unpredictable scenarios such as salvaging resulting from storm events or pest or pathogen outbreak. We would just need to work with your forester on finding those areas and removing them ultimately from the project area, since they are going to be managed. Both practices may also recommend reducing certain forest stressors that may be present on your property. Those can be invasive vegetation removal, invasive plants, or protecting your seedling or saplings from deer or moose browse. So when enrolling in the Family Forest Carbon Program, landowners receive the benefit of gaining access to forestry services. Oh, this is actually the next slide. Sorry, Harry. There we go. So as Scott mentioned, there are two different pathways for forest management plans. So the first pathway is that free template and a free forest management plan that either our staff or our partnering consulting foresters can construct for you. And then alternatively, landowners can receive a stipend to reimburse them for a forest management plan that may be written for another program such as NRCS or a state tax program. Depending on the program and the amount of detail required, the stipend may not fully cover the costs associated with the forester creating that management plan. So really depends on the detail and the requirements of that program that you are also enrolled in. The right-hand table shows the amount paid to the landowners as a stipend. The landowners will be paid for the forest management plan that covers their entire forested property, not just the areas enrolled in FFCP. So if you do have some areas that are ultimately not eligible for the Family Forest Carbon Program, you can still gain technical assistance, and that will be covered in your forest management plan. So as I mentioned, our program is compatible with most conservation easements or restrictions. Our forestry staff will look over your easement documentation to confirm that compatibility. Some of the things we may look for is language pertaining to harvesting activities, what is specifically allowed and what isn't. Other easements such as gas lines, right-of-ways, etc., pose no concern if they're already established before enrolling. In addition, our program can be compatible with the various state programs regarding current use. Our forestry staff, along with consulting foresters, can review your current use management plan to determine if any planned harvests would meet the harvesting guidelines that we have set in the Enhance Your Woodland practice. So really, it's a case-by-case basis compared to the current your current standing and what you have prescribed in your management plan. Pertaining to exclusions, our staff will look closely with you or your consulting forester to make sure that your project area enrolled does not contain these areas that are not eligible, such as maintained areas, buildings, plantations, any future building sites you may want in the future, such as a camp. And then also non-forested areas or areas that don't meet those stocking requirements. And as I mentioned above, both practices allow for removing trees for personal firewood use. Our annual maximum harvest is based on acreage. So at the minimum, we have 5 cords removal per year for the first 200 acres, and then an additional 5 cords for every additional 100 acres, up to 25 cords. And then some of the restrictions we have, the trees felled for firewood must be less than 12 inches and have to be taken from that lower canopy so that we're not taking the best trees that could continue to grow. And then the firewood should be evenly distributed or removed from the project area, so not in any single small area. So right now, if you do want to conduct a timber harvest while enrolled, we're having landowners work with consulting foresters, and that consulting forester will have to conduct a pre and post inventory to make sure that we're following our harvesting guidance and make sure that the activity is in compliance with the restrictions that we have set. And as I mentioned, some of these restrictions include a 25% removal of basal area, you can't remove more than 10% of the mean tree diameter, which is really a safeguard to make sure that we're not high grading the forest or extracting the value. And then we also have a stipulation that any harvesting has to adhere to those states' best management practices, especially as it pertains to water quality. And lastly, I'll end my spiel here with a quote from one of our landowners here in the Northeast, specifically Vermont, who realized that our program aligned with their goals and objectives for their property pretty seamlessly. The Johnson family is enrolled in that state's current use program, UVA, and they also conduct sugar maple operations. Both of these, at least in this circumstance, did not conflict with the eligibility or management restrictions in the family forest carbon programs. So a big success. And now I will pass it off to Kyle. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Sierra. Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Brown. I am a community manager with American Forest Foundation, and I sit on the community and sustained engagement team. Once you enroll in the program, myself and my team, we're the ones who will be your primary points of contact for the organization. We're the ones who are going to be answering your questions, getting you the information you need for the lifetime of your 20-year contract. And I'll also say as an aside, we may have met each other in the Northeast. If you're affiliated with the American Tree Farm System or Tree Farm, I also serve as the Northeast Regional Manager for the American Tree Farm System. So I'm here to talk initially a little bit about everybody's favorite subject, which is money. Diving right in, as was mentioned, for the Family Forest Carbon Program, our contracts are for 20 years. One way that we are unique, we pay our enrolled landowners based on their eligible acres times the payment amount for the practices that they are implemented. So Sierra went over this already, but we have 2 practices in the Northeast. We have the Enhance Your Woodlands practice, which pays exactly $200 per acre. And we have the more restrictive Growing Older Forest practice, which pays $300 per acre. And I can dive into this a little bit more on the next slide, but one thing I'd like to mention is that we currently have a premium option which will offer 20% more in payments. And then, of course, as a member of the program, you also get a forest management plan stipend if one of our own staff foresters doesn't draft your plan within those first 2 years. That stipend amount does vary depending on the amount of acreage that you own. And then talking a little bit more broadly about the process, forester will survey your property alongside you. You should receive your offer within 30 days to consider, and excuse me, you should receive your offer within 30 days and then have another 30 days to consider it. And then finally, the entire process from start to finish takes 80 days on average. So bear with me on this slide. It's a graph. There's a lot of numbers, but this is basically just showing you how much you can expect to be paid as a member of the Family Forest Carbon Program, and how much it differs between the premium option and the more traditional option, which I just mentioned. So as I said, landowners who enroll in our premium option will receive 20% higher per acre rates, in addition to receiving 20% of their contract total sooner. So the way that our program works, we pay landowners more upfront. Those payments taper off in the interim years, and then towards the end of the 20-year contract, you get paid a higher percentage each year. So that all amounts to 46% of the lifetime contract amount paid by year 3 for the premium option, as compared to 26% paid by year 3 with the traditional option. Breaking down the two practice amounts, with the traditional, as I just mentioned, per acre, you'd be getting $200 per acre for the Enhance Your Woodlands practice. And for growing older forests, you would get $300 per acre. Now, compared to the premium option, you get 20% more. So you'd be looking at $240 per acre for Enhance Your Woodlands and $360 for growing older forests. So just using a quick example, if you had 100 acres enrolled in the program with the premium option, you'd be looking at $24,000 in total for the lifetime of your contract with Enhance Your Woodlands and $36,000 with the growing older forest practice for those 100 acres. So breaking down the process a little bit more from start to finish, we would encourage you to go to familyforestcarbon.org. You can click on our Check Your Eligibility mapping tool to start the process and to start the qualification process, excuse me. Shortly thereafter, you will hear from an FFCP account manager, account representative, who will give you a little bit more information, ask you some questions, and initially start your eligibility, confirming your basic eligibility in the program. Next, you'll connect with an FFCP forester either on staff, or excuse me, you'll connect with an FFCP forester either virtually or on your property, and they'll further determine your eligibility and lay out some introductory plans for an FFCP project for those two practices. Next, you'll review your offer and sign your contract. Again, you have 30 days to do that. Next, you'll receive your first payment after you sign your offer. As mentioned already, you'll receive a stipend and be able to, if you go with your own forester or hire a consulting forester who is familiar with the program, you may receive a stipend to get that forest management place within 2 years. It's really important. Or we will do it if you go with one of our on-staff foresters. And finally, as I mentioned, as a community manager with the Community and Sustained Engagement team, once you are enrolled in the program, we are the ones who are going to be communicating with you regularly. At the top, Scott mentioned we have a first of its kind social media platform that I'd like to mention that isn't specified on this slide, but that's one way of getting in touch with us and connecting with other like-minded, stewardship-minded landowners like yourselves. If you want to join that social media platform, it's called the Family Forest. You'll want to go to community.forestfoundation.org. Quick plug there. It is unlike other social media platforms you may be used to. We don't collect and sell your data. It's really just, you can find a lot of professional advice there, ask your questions, or even post a picture of, I don't know, an invasive species and ask a question, or something that you're excited about your land. It's a really heartwarming experience for social media platforms. So again, that's the Family Forest, or community.forestfoundation.org. And then in addition to that, you may sign up for one of our newsletters, which we send out quarterly. That information is highly valued among our participants. And then finally, each quarter, we commit ourselves to a quarterly coffee, as we call it, with our landowners. And that's another heartwarming event where we bring folks together to ask questions, talk about your land, et cetera. That is a program-wide event that happens every quarter. And we have a lot of dedicated folks who show up regularly to that. So this is all to say, once you enroll in the program, you're not, left to your own devices. You have an entire team of individuals who are here to help, or if we don't know an answer to your question, we'll hopefully point you in the right direction. So some next steps, if you're interested in the program, go to familyforestcarbon.org/howitworks. Again, you can check your eligibility using our mapping tool. Go to familyforestcarbon.org/get-started. And finally, once you've already heard from an account manager, you can schedule a call with them by clicking in the link of your personal woodland report which can also be found in your in the invitation for this webinar, or in your FFCP qualification notification email, which you should already have on hand. And that concludes our presentation. We are now in the position of asking questions. So again, if you want to ask us a question, we encourage you to go to the bottom of your screen and hit the Q&A button. And there you can answer questions or ask questions, and we'll hopefully have the answer for you. So starting from the top, I am curious to hear, probably from you, Scott, how does AFF differentiate itself from other companies like Forest Carbon Works?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Forest Carbon Works is probably our closest competitor in terms of how their program is structured. So there's some small differences, like we have a 20-year contract. I believe theirs is 25. They, I think, require a minimum of 40 acres. We require a minimum of 30. So there's some smaller details to parse through, but I would say major differentiators. We're nonprofit run, so we are not trying to turn a profit from you enrolling your property. That one resonates quite a bit with a lot of folks. We have fixed payment rates, so theirs are variable. Other programs, you'll see variable payment rates depending on various factors, usually related to how effectively your forest is expected to sequester carbon. That could be good for some folks, it could be bad for others. So if you're looking for something stable and guaranteed, as I mentioned, that you'll get that with ours, and you'll know right from the start of engaging with us what that payment rate would be for each eligible acre. It may not be the case with other programs. So we always encourage folks to do their own research. We're not trying to steal you away from the market. We want you to make the best decision for yourselves. So those ones came to mind, but yeah, I'm sure there's some others if you explore the market.
Thanks, Scott. So this next question, Michael has over 80 acres, says that 50, let's say, hypothetically speaking, 50% of his 80 acres meets the forest type criteria of the program. Can the full 80 acres be enrolled, or just the eligible acreage? I know the answer to that, but I'll leave it to you, Sierra.
Yeah, so great question, Michael. I'll speak to generalist, but it would really depend on like taking a look at your property. But so if 50%, let's say 40 acres meets that forest type criteria, that's at least 30 acres. So we're good there. You can enroll up to 25 acres that does not meet the forest type. So we could enroll an additional 25 acres that don't meet that forest type criteria. So in total, that would be 65 acres. But like I said, that really, we'd love to see your property or talk with you over the phone on that, and we could get into details, and maybe that full 80 acres could be enrolled.
Thanks, Sierra. So this next question, are there penalties for breaking a signed 20-year contract? So my answer to that, I would say that we are not in this to be punitive, that penalties vary on a case-by-case basis, but at the end of the day, we do need to recoup costs and maintain the integrity of the program. Be curious, Scott, if you have anything to add there. The next question is related to that. They say the future is uncertain. What happens if we need to change or cancel?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. As Kyle mentioned, there are penalties. We have a 250% penalty for an intentional breach of contract. It's a big number. But there's a reason for that. As we mentioned, there's a lot that goes into developing these carbon projects beyond the financial incentives we're paying to our landowners. The investment we put in our staff, in forest management plan development, in the administration on the back end of the program that landowners may not see, around getting our product verified, making sure we're accounting properly, monitoring properly, verifying our credits properly. All of that comes at a cost, and there's a hidden benefit to landowners who are enrolled who are getting that benefit from us. So all of that combined actually means when a contract breaches and we get that 250% penalty, we're still not made whole in the investment that we've put into that property. So that's a little bit of light on the penalty and what you may see in the contract and why it's set at that rate. If you do need to change or cancel, The penalty would apply if it came to just terminating the contract outright by choice, but that's really bad for us, as I just described. It's not great for you either with these penalties. So we're going to exhaust every option we have to find a solution that works for both of us before we finally settle on terminating a contract. So if anything's coming up where you're uncertain after enrollment, you're going to talk to Kyle's team. Right. And we're going to do everything we can to help you. So the last thing we want is to have to kick someone out of the program, have to pursue those penalties.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. So this next question, and I'll remind folks in the interim, if you want to go into the Q&A option on Zoom and ask your question, please feel free to do so. Robert asks, I have an existing CSP contract with the NRCS to address invasives and interfering vegetation. Will this affect my enrollment?
Yes, great question, Robert. So this would not affect your enrollment if you went the traditional route. And then I'll also say in the premium option, since this is specifically for interfering vegetation, this also would not affect your enrollment in the premium option as well. Our program under the premium option is correlated with the practice 666 improved forest management in our NRCS. So if you have a current CSP that has practice 666 and you're under contract and committed to that practice, you would not be able to enroll with our premium option. So that's the only conflict, but invasives and interfering vegetation would not qualify. That you can continue on with that practice and it would not be in conflict.
Next question comes from Michael again. American chestnut has never grown naturally in far northern New York. I'm considering acquiring some seedlings of real American chestnut to plant them. Will this be allowed under either version of the program?
Yes, so we do allow supplemental planting as long as you're not clearing an area and then planting a whole new forest. So supplemental planting in small openings is allowed in either of our practices.
And this next question from somebody, are contracts transferable in the case of a sale or of an inheritance?
Yes, they are. In the case of either, we can transfer to the new owner. The new owner will always have the ability to assume responsibility and also assume benefits from the program. That's our best case scenario when land changes hands that's enrolled in the program. There's a whole process to that. It's detailed in the contract. The forms that we would use are also included in the contract. So if you get to that point, you'll be able to see that. But again, Kyle's team helps with those scenarios as well as our enrollment team who deals with our contracts specifically. And yeah, that's best case scenario for us. If it can't change hands, that's when things could get hairy. But an important note there, if you are enrolled in the program and you decide to sell the property, it's very important to divulge the existence of this agreement to any potential buyer so that they know what they're getting themselves into and a handoff can go smoothly. If they don't know, you sell the property and then they decide they're not interested, that can be a very tricky situation for us as well as for you and the buyer. So I would just add that.
Yeah, and I would say to add to that, Scott, we have come across one or two examples where a landowner has unfortunately passed away. In that event, we implemented as best a solution as we can, which is to ask enrollees in the program to provide an emergency contact. And a question we often get is, why do you need an emergency contact? This isn't a doctor's office, but it's for this exact reason. If the designated individual who is in communication with us is no longer responsive, we're not able to hear back from them. We need somebody on the backup to get in contact with so that we don't face that sort of an issue where we have an unexpected contract breach. And I'll say that in at least one of the examples, the contract was successfully transferred to the individual's children who weren't, yeah, I'll just say that. I'll stop there. but are enthusiastic participants in the program now. So another question, I grant an easement to the local snowmobile club to use my logging trail as a snowmobile trail. No ATVs permitted. Is this a problem?
Nope, not a problem at all. As I mentioned, you gain or you maintain all of the permissions for recreation that you would typically have as a landowner. Again, as long as they're not driving those snowmobiles through 20% of your trees and knocking them down, which I certainly hope that's not the case, then you're perfectly fine with that kind of arrangement. Same thing with hunting leases and things of that sort.
And another question. If the land is in a family nominee realty trust, does that make a difference?
I'm not super familiar with that specific type of trust, so I would certainly encourage you, if you're interested, to engage with our program, and we can answer that over the course of pre-enrollment. In most cases, we can work with trusts. There's a couple extra things we need to do from a documentation perspective, just to make sure we have all of our paperwork lined up, but we do work with trusts all the time, family trusts. Yeah, like I said, it takes a couple extra steps, but we can in almost every case enroll that type of ownership structure.
Yep. And next question again from Michael. I own 100+ acres of forest land in northern New York, where I am originally from. I presently live in the Western United States, so I'm not a resident of New York. Would my lot still be eligible for this program? Short answer is yes. I'll let you all take it away to elaborate on that.
Not much to elaborate on. Yes, we have plenty of absentee landowners or folks that don't visit their property more than once or twice a year. We would need access to the property to potentially do a pre-enrollment visit or post-enrollment monitoring once every 5 years. A small portion of enrolled properties are selected for that on-the-ground monitoring. So as long as we're able to access the property in those cases with your permission, there's no issue with the landowner not being able to be present.
Another question, are prescribed burns allowed?
Yes, so we do currently allow burns, but we need to account for tree mortality from them. So most of the time that's tends to be in the smaller diameter class anyways, not the big rigorous trees out there. So we would just have to kind of talk through the logistics of that, obviously. And this is most likely only compatible with the enhanced woodland practice. So kind of, pairing that with some sort of gap treatment or thinning practice or harvesting.
And another question, it's an interesting one. With rising economic costs, do you foresee higher per acre premiums?
That's a great question. I guess the easiest answer is we hope so. We need it to be, first and foremost, we need the program to be financially viable for our landowners, for us, and for our customers. So our per acre premiums, or payment rates, as we like to call them, we're going to put them as high as we can to pass on as much benefit to our landowners as possible, given the market dynamics. But of course, as costs rise, our internal costs rise as well. So I certainly can't make any guarantees. There is anticipated market growth in the future. So I would hope our payment rates will be able to increase slowly over time. But what I would also say is, based on where we're at, where the market's at right now, I would not advise any of the landowners that I work with to hold their breath and wait for that to change in the near future. We don't have anything on the immediate horizon that we can see that would lead to a higher premium in the near future, other than things like our premium option, which is just grant funded to provide an additional 20% premium. So those opportunities may come along, but the market dynamics themselves aren't showing any signs that we could increase our payment rates in the very near future.
Yes, a crystal ball would be greatly helpful. That's all the questions I see on my end. I'll pause and leave an opportunity for you all to ask any more questions you have, again, in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen.
think we did have one more drop in Q&A, Kyle.
Oh, did you? Okay, I
Oh.
see. Thank you. Do you want, okay. How often will AFF request access to the property? What kinds of things will you do on the property? Big question.
Yeah, so there's a couple different scenarios where we would come to the property. I mentioned a pre-enrollment visit. So in cases where we can't get all the information that we need to properly develop a project plan and an enrollment offer before enrollment, we may have a forester come out to take some measurements of the forest to validate the details in our project plan. When that happens, it's also, of course, a great opportunity if you're interested for the landowner to meet with the forester and talk about your property, your goals, and everything of the like. After enrollment, if you're in the premium option, we do an environmental assessment visit. So we would the environmental assessment's required from the USDA in order to provide this grant funding from them to landowners. So we have to come out and take a bunch of different assessments of a bunch of different factors, environmental factors, cultural factors, all sorts of things. We do all the work and we submit it on your behalf, but we do need to be on the ground to evaluate those things. So that's specific to the premium option. Another one, if you're having an FMP developed by a forester, that forester is going to come out, they're going to want to meet with you, they're going to want to get to know the property to make an accurate and applicable forest management plan. And finally, the possibility, the three that I mentioned earlier are one-time visits. Maybe the FMP, if you get it updated in 10 years, it would be 2 visits. The monitoring, if you're selected for it, would happen once every 5 years. So they would come in the first year and then subsequently every 5 years. And what we mean by monitoring, kind of a scary word, but basically we take like a metal stake, we pound it into the ground at the monitoring plot. And that's basically just a way for us to say, this is where we measure. And then every 5 years we come back and we take the same measurements there. And it's a way for us to sample our entire enrollment population to validate that the projections of forest growth and development that we had at the beginning of the project are actually happening on the ground. That's how I always explain it, but Sierra is more well-versed in forest growth. So did I miss anything, Sierra?
Nope, I think that was a good description of a monitoring plot.
Okay, great. Yeah, and so that happens once every 5 years throughout the 20-year program. And I think that explained the whole question, but I'll also add we would always get in touch with you before visiting the property. So we do not, last thing we want to do is show up unannounced on someone's property. So we'll always get in touch. We want to make it work for you. If you're going to be around or want to be around, we're happy to facilitate that as well. But we're always first and foremost going to seek permission to access the property.
Awesome. So another question, does the parcel need to be surveyed or are tax maps used to determine acreage?
Good question. A little bit of both. We rely on tax maps as our first source of truth for our projects, but if there's a discrepancy from the landowner's perspective, the pretty much only way that we can usurp the tax maps as a source of truth is through a survey. So if you have a survey, that's awesome. We love those. If there is a discrepancy and you're not comfortable with what we're finding in the tax maps and you're willing to get a survey, that's another way that we can resolve that discrepancy.
If we apply for our own grants, would that violate the contract?
I don't know that we've ever come across this question. I would say no, so long as they don't come with an interference of your ability to harvest your timber. Now, we don't encourage harvesting. We do allow sustainable harvesting in most of our practices. We don't encourage it, but we need there to be a risk for the way that a natural carbon project like ours operates. We need there to be a risk at the beginning of the program and throughout the life of the program of timber harvesting so that our intervention, our agreement is making a difference. If there isn't a risk of this timber being harvested, then us coming in and saying, don't harvest too much of your timber isn't actually going to make a climate impact. So if those grants are stipulating no harvesting whatsoever, suddenly the effectiveness of our program is gone. So we love, obviously, as I mentioned, providing opportunities for and hearing about opportunities for our landowners to find additional funding or other resources. But that would be the only caveat that I would add.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Scott, if you do decide to enroll the person who's asking this question, reach out to us, reach out to community managers at forestfoundation.org. Again, my team is here to support you and answer any questions you have. With this particular question, it would maybe depend on the grant. We'd want to dig in further and make sure you're in good shape. Any additional questions?
Very engaged group today. I did one of these for another region probably about a month ago, and we definitely didn't have this many questions, this many good questions. So thank you all for engaging. Hopefully you got something out of this, enjoyed it, and yeah, that's my sign off. But Kyle, Sierra, if you have anything to add.
No, just thank you very much for attending. And yeah, like Scott said, very thought-provoking questions and very good questions to ask. So thank you for engaging with us.
Ditto to both Scott and Sierra. Thank you all for attending. I think we're good to sign off now. Take care, everyone.